Silence swallowed the marble hallway at 11:30 p.m. Then footsteps. Then screaming. A 6-year-old girl named Emma stumbled through the darkness of the Bianchi mansion's second floor, her torn pink nightgown catching the light from wall sconces, blood running from a cut above her eyebrow. She was crying without sound, the way children cry when they are too terrified to breathe. Behind her, 2 men in dark tactical gear moved like predators through water, measured, unhurried, completely certain of the outcome. Emma's bare feet slapped against cold marble. Left. Right. Left. Right. Looking for anything. Anyone. Then a door opened. Nora Reynolds stepped out of a supply closet carrying fresh linens, and in the fraction of a second it took her to see the child and understand what was happening, she dropped everything. White sheets and towels scattered across the floor like snow. She moved without thinking, without calculating risk, without the voice inside her head that had learned long ago to protect itself first. She simply moved Emma behind her body and stood there, a woman in a black and white maid's uniform, trembling like a candle in the wind but refusing to move. The men stopped. "Who the hell are you?" The first one's hand moved toward his jacket. His voice was flat, professional, dangerous. "Get out of the way." Nora's voice shook. But it came out. "She's just a child. You'll have to go through me." 3 floors below, in a study lined with mahogany and books that no one read, Giovanni Bianchi watched the security camera feed on multiple monitors. His wheelchair was positioned behind an antique desk that cost more than most houses, positioned so that he could see every entrance, every corner, every moment of control. He was a man built for power, shoulders broad, face sharp, eyes the color of a winter sky right before a storm. But from the waist down, he was hollow. Paralyzed. Incomplete. His jaw clenched as he watched Nora Reynolds stand in front of Emma. In 3 years, she had been invisible. A ghost in his household. A woman he had seen maybe twice, a shadow in a black and white uniform that meant nothing, that cost nothing, that fit into the margins of his vast and careful life. He had not known her name until this moment. Now he could not look away. The door burst open. Vinny, his lieutenant of 11 years, stood in the doorway breathing hard. Vinny was tall and scarred, with hands that had solved problems the way most people solve them, with direct and brutal force. "Boss, we found the breach." "Tell me." "Your brother Carlo. He let them in. He sold Emma's location to the trafficking network for $200,000. Giovanni's face turned to stone. His hand gripped the armrest of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white, until it looked like his skin might split open from the pressure underneath. He did not speak. He did not move. He only watched the screen where Nora Reynolds was still standing between 2 armed men and a child, her back to the camera, completely unaware that she was being watched by the most powerful man in Seattle. "We're moving them out," Vinny said. "Security team is 10 seconds away." But Giovanni was not listening anymore. He was thinking about betrayal. He was thinking about a woman he had loved once, who had left him standing at the altar of St. Catherine's Cathedral in a white tuxedo, in a wheelchair, in front of 200 people and every news camera in the state. He was thinking about how she had walked away, how she had chosen money, how she had orchestrated his humiliation with a man named Douglas Hale. And now his own brother was doing the same thing. The security team moved through the second floor like ghosts. Black suits. Weapons drawn. They collected Emma in 30 seconds and carried Nora downstairs without asking who she was or why she had put her life between a child and danger. She went with them because resistance would have meant nothing. She was nobody. Just a maid. But somewhere in the surveillance room, a man in a wheelchair was watching her face as they brought her down the grand staircase, and something cold and dangerous was beginning to stir in his chest. Meanwhile, on the other side of Seattle, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the city lights, Diana Whitfield stood at her floor-to-ceiling window with a glass of wine that cost more than Nora Reynolds earned in a month. Diana was 52 years old but looked 42, the kind of woman who had spent her entire life turning money into youth, into beauty, into a shield against consequence. She was on the phone. "Is it done?" she asked. "No." Douglas Hale's voice crackled through the speaker. He was angry. She could hear it underneath the words like blood underneath a bandage. "The girl is secure, but we lost the asset. Security team got there first." "What asset?" "There was a maid. She interfered. We'll find her, but for now." Diana ended the call. She had not survived in this world by tolerating incompetence. She had survived by eliminating it. Douglas Hale was useful, but only as long as he remained useful. The maid was a problem that could be solved later. Right now, she needed to focus on the only thing that mattered. Giovanni Bianchi did not know yet that she had been part of this. That she had approved the plan. That she had, in fact, suggested it. The wedding had been her idea too. But we need to go back further. We need to understand how a woman with $78 in her pocket and 8 years of hidden scars ended up standing between a child and men with guns. We need to understand the moment 3 years earlier when Nora Reynolds arrived at the Bianchi mansion for the first time, when she was still young enough to believe that if she worked hard enough, suffered quietly enough, and made herself small enough, she could disappear from her own tragedy. That was the morning it started raining. She got off the bus on Capitol Hill with a single suitcase, worn grey at the corners, held together with a leather belt because the handle had broken 6 months ago. She was 24 years old but looked 32. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it hurt. Her eyes were the color of lake water under ice, beautiful and completely unreachable. In her pocket, $78. A folded bus ticket. A prayer card with the Virgin Mary on one side and her mother's funeral service information on the other, dated 1998. The rain fell in sheets. Not the gentle rain of Seattle that people talk about, but the kind of rain that feels like a punishment, cold and merciless and personal. Nora had worn her only decent coat, a brown polyester thing that did nothing against the wet. By the time she reached the Bianchi mansion's iron gates, she was soaked completely through. The gates were open. No one was guarding them. She pushed them wider with her shoulder and walked up the driveway, past the fountain, past the black cars with tinted windows, toward the servants' entrance at the back of the house. She knew where to go because she had researched everything. She had memorized the bus routes. She had read the job posting 3 times. She had practiced saying her name in the mirror until it sounded confident. Mrs. Chen answered the door. She was 67 years old, the head of household staff, a woman with grey streaking through her black hair and the kind of face that had given up on being kind to new people a long time ago. She looked Nora up and down, at the soaked coat, the worn shoes, the suitcase held together with a belt. "You're early," she said. "I'm sorry." "The bus?" "You start tomorrow. 6 a.m. You'll work the east wing and the main stairs. You'll be invisible. Do you understand what that means?" Nora understood perfectly. It means you do not speak unless spoken to. You do not touch anything that is not yours to clean. You do not exist until you are needed. You keep your eyes down. You keep your mouth closed. You are a ghost. The rain fell harder. The sound of it on the roof was like something beating against the house from the outside, like something trying to get in. Nora nodded. "We provide room and board. $300 a week. You'll have Sundays off if nothing needs cleaning. There's a basement apartment. You share it with Maria. She's been here 5 years. She will not welcome you, but that is not your concern. $300 a week. That was $2,100 a month. That was enough to survive on. That was enough to disappear." "Thank you," Nora whispered. "Don't thank me. You're lucky no one asked about your past. If anyone asks, you tell them you have no past. You have no family. You have no story. You are just a person who cleans things." Nora wanted to say something. She wanted to explain that the past had found her anyway, that it lived under her skin like a parasite, that she could never be truly invisible no matter how small she made herself. But Mrs. Chen was already closing the door. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Nora put on her black and white uniform for the first time. The fabric was stiff and new. It smelled like bleach and possibility. She looked at herself in the mirror of the tiny basement apartment and saw exactly what Mrs. Chen had promised she would be: a ghost. A ghost who would survive. A ghost who would clean marble hallways and dust picture frames and move through this mansion like she had never been born, had never suffered, had never been beaten by a man named Douglas Hale for 8 years straight. She pulled her hair back tighter. She lowered her eyes. And she began. 3 years passed like water through a strainer. She moved through the Bianchi mansion so quietly that people stopped noticing her at all. She cleaned the study of the man in the wheelchair, the man with the hard eyes and the harder voice, and he never once looked at her. She watched his men come and go. She listened to their conversations while she dusted. She learned their names. She learned their codes and their loyalty and the way they would die for Giovanni Bianchi without hesitation. She learned to be invisible so well that she almost forgot she was real. But she was counting. Always counting. The $300 a week. The rent she was not paying. The future she was building, 1 week at a time, in a bank account under a name that was not the one she was born with. She was going to disappear completely. She was going to become someone new. Until a 6-year-old girl with a torn pink nightgown and blood on her forehead made her see that some things mattered more than survival. Until a man in a wheelchair, watching on a screen, finally noticed her. Until everything changed in the time it took for one person to choose courage instead of safety. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor above her, moving fast now. Doors slamming. Voices shouting. The mansion was waking up. And Nora Reynolds, standing in the grand hallway with her heart beating like a trapped animal, finally understood that she had just made a choice that could not be unmade. She had stepped out of the shadows. And the man in the wheelchair had seen her. 3 years earlier, the taxi pulled up to wrought iron gates that stretched 12 feet high, and Nora Reynolds sat in the back seat with her hands folded in her lap, afraid to breathe. The Bianchi mansion rose behind those gates like something from another world entirely. 3 stories of pale limestone, windows that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back like scattered diamonds, a driveway that curved through manicured gardens where every flower seemed to have been placed by hand. She had $78 in her pocket. That was everything. That was her entire life reduced to a handful of bills she kept touching through the fabric of her jeans to make sure they were still there, still real, still hers. The taxi driver turned around, his eyes tired. "This is it. That'll be $32.50. She handed him $35 and stepped out into the Seattle afternoon. The air smelled like cut grass and expensive things. She could see security cameras mounted on the gate pillars, the red lights blinking steady, watching. 2 men in dark suits stood near the entrance, and they looked at her the way people had been looking at her for 8 years. Like something that didn't belong. Like something broken that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. She clutched the prayer card in her left hand. It was worn soft from 8 years of touching it, the edges curled, the image of St. Catherine of Siena faded to almost nothing. The words beneath were barely legible anymore. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward anyway. Her mother had given it to her 17 years ago, pressed it into her hand the night before she died. Nora had never let it go. 8 years before this moment, there had been a compound in rural Oregon, built low and hidden among pine trees so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. The basement had been concrete and darkness and the sound of chains. 23 women in rooms with no windows, no doors that locked from the inside. The man who kept them there was named Douglas Hale. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a smile that looked like something carved from stone, and he told them every single day that no one was coming. That no one would believe them if they tried to run. That they were nothing. 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 Nora had been 22 years old when she arrived at that compound. She had been beautiful then. She had still believed that beauty meant something. She learned quickly that it meant you suffered in a different way, that it meant the worst of them wanted to prove they could ruin something precious. 8 years. 2,920 days. She She had kept count. On the night she left, she had waited until the compound was quiet, until Hale was drunk in his office and the guards were rotating shift changes. She had run through woods so dark she could not see her own hands in front of her face, branches tearing at her skin, her feet bleeding through the stolen shoes she wore. She had found a donation box behind a church 40 miles away and taken clothes that almost fit. She had stolen a wallet from a man sleeping on a bench and discovered it contained $78. She had walked to a Greyhound station and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle because it was far, because it was north, because she had read once that the rain there could wash away anything. The rain had not washed away anything. But it had hidden her. For 3 years, the Seattle rain had hidden her so well that almost no one remembered she existed. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, had hired her without asking many questions. A woman in her 60s with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes that had seen too much, she had simply said, "You'll work 6 days a week. 5 a.m. start, midnight finish on Saturdays. $300 weekly. Housing provided in the attic. You don't speak to the family. You don't speak to Mr. Bianchi's associates. You don't look at them. You clean and you disappear. Can you do that?" Nora had nodded. Disappearing was something she had become very good at. She climbed the marble staircase that first morning before the sun rose, and the staircase was so polished that she could see her own reflection moving upward in steps. It unsettled her, seeing herself. She had gotten used to not existing. The third-floor hallway was lined with paintings of people who had money so old it looked like paint. Stern-faced men with cold eyes. Women in diamonds that probably cost more than a house. Children in velvet who would never know what it meant to count every dollar. Her attic room was small, with a sloped ceiling, a twin bed with white sheets, a dresser that had one drawer that stuck, a window that looked out over the gardens. It was the most beautiful place she had ever lived. She had sat on the edge of that bed and cried for the first time since she had left the compound, silent tears that seemed to come from somewhere so deep that she was surprised there was anything left in her to cry. The mansion swallowed her. She moved through it like water, like something with no edges, no substance. She cleaned the library on Mondays, running a soft cloth over leather-bound books whose words she could not read because she had never finished high school. She cleaned the bathrooms on Tuesdays, scrubbing fixtures of polished chrome that had never been used. She pressed the laundry on Wednesdays, running an iron over sheets and towels with the same careful precision she ran it over her own damaged hands. On Thursdays, she cleaned the study of the man in the wheelchair. His name was Giovanni Bianchi, and he had eyes like slate. Dark, cold, reflecting nothing. She knew his name because she heard the other staff members whisper it. She knew he was in the wheelchair because a car accident when he was 31 years old, someone said. She knew he ran some kind of business from that study because men in expensive suits came and went, and they always left looking smaller than they had been when they arrived. She had never been certain he actually saw her. She would dust the shelves near his desk while he sat with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian, and his eyes would be fixed on the window, on the city beyond, on something she could never reach or understand. She would empty his trash can, careful not to make a sound, and he would not acknowledge her presence. Once, he had wheeled himself close to where she was standing, and she had pressed herself against the wall so he could pass, making herself thinner, smaller, less real. He had not looked at her. She had held her breath until he was gone, then let it out slowly, the way a person would if they were learning to live again. The mansion had a rhythm like a heartbeat. Morning deliveries at 8 o'clock, the sound of trucks rolling up the driveway. Lunch preparation starting at 11, the kitchen filling with the smell of things that Nora would never eat. Dinner parties on Friday and Saturday nights, when the family would gather and laugh, their voices carrying upstairs in waves of joy that seemed impossible to her. How could people laugh like that? How could they not be afraid? She was always afraid. The fear lived in her chest like a second heartbeat, constant, familiar. It was worst at night, alone in her attic room with the sloped ceiling and the window that looked out over the gardens. She would lie in bed with her hand pressed against the scars on her back, feeling the way they ran in every direction like a map drawn in pain, and she would whisper the same prayer she had whispered every night for 8 years. Tomorrow I'll be brave enough to live. Tomorrow I'll be brave enough to live. Tomorrow I'll be brave enough to live. The words were a spell, a summoning, a desperate hope that kept her breathing. But she was counting too. Always counting. The $300 each week, placed in a bank account under a name that was not the one she was born with. The name Elena Voss, dead 6 months now according to a document she had forged herself, now belonged to Nora Reynolds, who had never existed before 3 years ago and who planned to disappear completely as soon as she had enough money. 6 months, maybe. $18,000, and she could vanish. She could go somewhere so far that Douglas Hale could never find her. She could start again. She could be someone who had never known fear. She moved through the mansion like a ghost. The other staff members learned to talk over her. They forgot her name almost as soon as they learned it. She became part of the background, like the furniture, like the artwork on the walls. Mrs. Chen once called her Elena. Nora had not corrected her. Nora had learned that correcting people, disagreeing with them, claiming space in the world was dangerous. So she had simply said, "Yes, Mrs. Chen," and let herself be renamed. The summer of her 3rd year in the mansion, the weather began to change. The rain that had been gentle in spring turned violent in July. Storms came up from the Pacific with electricity in the air, and the sky would split open in the afternoons. Lightning that turned everything white for a moment. Thunder that shook the windows. Rain that hammered against the roof like something alive, something angry, something trying to break through. She was cleaning the hallway outside Giovanni's study on a Thursday afternoon when the storm came. The power flickered once, twice, then the entire mansion went dark. She stood in the blackness with her dust cloth still in her hand, her heart suddenly racing. The darkness meant something. The darkness meant something could happen that no one would see. She heard footsteps moving quickly from Giovanni's study, heard Franco's voice, one of the men, she knew his name from listening, say something urgent in Italian. She pressed herself against the wall, making herself disappear into the shadows like she had learned to do. Vinny, the other one, was saying, "The servers are protected. Backup generator should kick in any second now." The way he spoke suggested he was reassuring someone. Reassuring Giovanni. And then the lights came back, sudden and harsh, and she saw him there in the hallway no more than 15 feet away. Giovanni Bianchi in his wheelchair, wearing a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He had a phone in one hand and his face was very still, very calm, but his eyes were burning with something that looked like rage. The kind of rage that people felt right before everything changed. Right before violence became necessary. She did not move. She did not breathe. She simply waited to become invisible again. But what she did not know was that the storm was about to teach her something about courage. What she did not know was that in this moment, while lightning tore through the Seattle sky and rain hammered the windows like 1,000 urgent hands, her invisible life was about to end. The storm that summer came without warning, the way the worst things usually do. June in Seattle meant emerald trees and gray skies threatening rain that might never fall. But this Tuesday was different. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the temperature had climbed to 92 degrees, humidity hanging thick and suffocating over the mansion grounds. Purple-black clouds rolled in from the west like a bruise spreading across skin. The first drops hit the tall library windows at 8:15 in the evening, not like rain but like bullets, like something alive and angry testing the glass. Nora Reynolds stood on a wooden ladder, alone on the 3rd floor, reaching toward the highest shelf to dust the leather-bound volumes no one had opened in years. She was 29 but looked older, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who counted pennies instead of sleeping. Her black uniform hung slightly loose on her frame. She had lost weight these past months without meaning to, her body simply consuming itself because there was nothing to consume. The worn prayer card her grandmother had given her sat folded in her apron pocket, the laminated edges soft from 8 years of being held when nothing else helped. Lightning forked across the sky, so close the chandeliers overhead flickered and dimmed. Nora climbed down quickly, her movements practiced and efficient. She had learned in 3 years at the mansion how to move without drawing attention, how to exist as background, as furniture, as the kind of woman people looked through rather than at. She hurried to close the tall windows before the rain could soak the Persian rug beneath, but the wind was faster. Rain poured in sheets, drenching the burgundy curtains, pooling on the marble sill. Through the wall she shared with Giovanni's study, she heard voices. Men's voices. Urgent. Speaking over each other in a way that suggested something had broken. She should leave. 3 years at the mansion had taught her that hearing things could be dangerous. That invisibility was safety. That the smartest response was always to disappear. But her hands froze on the curtain rod. One voice she recognized, deep and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that made men move, belonged to Giovanni Bianchi. He should have been in physical therapy at this hour. He was never in his study on Tuesday evenings. The study door was cracked open perhaps 2 inches. Through that narrow gap, she could see the corner of his desk, could hear him speaking with the kind of rage that came from being betrayed by blood. Carlo sold us out. His words came clipped, precise, the anger behind them like something contained and pressurized. My own brother gave them Emma's school schedule. Her route home. Everything. For what? $200,000 and a promise they'd let him run the docks. Vinny's voice responded, one of the men she'd learned to recognize from 3 years of listening without being heard. Boss, if word gets out your own blood betrayed you, what does that do to your standing with the families? It does nothing, Giovanni said. Because my own blood is already dead to me. Franco spoke next, the other lieutenant, younger than Vinny, his voice tight. The trafficking network's moving tonight. According to our sources, they have 4 locations active in Seattle. Warehouses. We don't know how many women they're holding. If they move them, then nobody finds them, Giovanni finished. They disappear into the supply chain and become statistics. Become somebody else's problem. Becomes nobody's problem. A pause, weighted with decision. We move at midnight. All for location simultaneously. I want those women out before Hale can move them. Nora's breath caught. She knew that name. Douglas Hale. The sound of it in this beautiful mansion, spoken by this powerful man, collapsed 8 years of distance into nothing. She could smell the compound again, the concrete, the chemical cleaners, the human waste they were not allowed to use the toilet for. She could feel hands on her skin that she had spent 8 years trying to forget. Lightning cracked so close it seemed to illuminate the inside of her chest. She didn't think. She simply backed away from the study door, moving toward the library window she had not yet closed. But her foot caught the brass bookend she'd moved while cleaning, the heavy one shaped like a lion. It fell to the floor with a sound like a gunshot. The study door flew open. Franco emerged first, weapon drawn, his eyes finding her in less than a second. You. The maid. How long have you been standing there? Nora couldn't speak. The words had disappeared somewhere into the thunder rolling across the sky. Franco's hand closed around her arm, not gently, and pulled her into the study. Giovanni sat behind his desk, Vinny positioned by the other door like a guard at a tomb. Rain hammered the windows so hard the glass seemed to bow inward with the force of it. Lightning illuminated Giovanni's face in stark relief, sharp features, dark eyes that held the kind of intelligence that could read a person like a page, and something else. Something wounded beneath the authority. His gaze found her and held. What did you hear? His voice came quiet now, which was somehow more dangerous than if he had shouted. Nora's mouth opened and closed. Nothing came out. The lightning struck close enough to shake the building. The electricity cut out. The emergency generators kicked in with a mechanical hum, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green light that made the study look like a photograph of itself. And in that moment between darkness and light, she saw it. Blood spreading slowly across his white shirt, a fresh wound on his shoulder she hadn't noticed before. He had been shot. Recently. Within the last few hours, probably. he was sitting there with a bullet wound, conducting business, making decisions about for warehouses and how many women to save, and nobody around him was reacting as though anything was wrong. She moved without deciding to move. Her hand found the clean cloth she always carried in her apron pocket, old habit from the compound, from needing something to stanch blood, from needing to keep things controlled. She stepped forward and pressed the cloth to his shoulder with steady hands. The room went absolutely still. Vinny's mouth fell open. Franco's weapon hand wavered. Giovanni stared at this woman who should have been terrified, who should have been begging for her life, but instead approached his wheelchair without permission and touched him like she had the right to. "You're bleeding," she said. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone braver. Giovanni's voice came quiet, almost wondering, "You're not afraid of me?" "I've seen worse than blood," Nora whispered, pressing harder as the cloth began to soak red. "Much worse." The rain pounded the windows like it wanted inside. Thunder shook the mansion. And for the first time in 3 years, Giovanni Bianchi looked at Nora Reynolds and truly saw her. Not as a servant. Not as background. But as something he had forgotten existed in his world of concrete and violence and isolation. The next morning, she woke expecting to be fired. Or worse. Instead, there was an envelope slipped beneath her attic room door containing $500 in cash and a note in precise handwriting, "For your discretion. And your help. GB." She counted the money 3 times because it was more than she had seen in months. By afternoon, Mrs. Chen, the mansion's head housekeeper, pulled her aside in the kitchen. "Mr. Bianchi wants you assigned to the 3rd floor permanently. His private quarters. You'll report directly to Vinny for instructions." The other maid stared. In the mansion's rigid hierarchy, this had never happened before. For 2 weeks, Nora worked the 3rd floor alone, and slowly the pattern emerged like handwriting becoming legible. She would clean Giovanni's study at 9 in the morning when he was always in physical therapy in the West Wing. But on her second day, there was fresh coffee waiting on the side table, still hot, just how she made it. On day 4, a plate of breakfast pastries appeared that she knew hadn't been there when she arrived. On day 7, she found an envelope with $2,000 and a note, "You mentioned your window doesn't lock. This should cover repairs." She had never mentioned her window to anyone. He had seen it on security footage. He had watched her live, had known about the gap in the frame that let the October cold cut through her room like a knife. On day 18, she was replacing books in the library when the study door opened behind her. Giovanni entered, wheeling himself with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made peace with what his body could do. Her instinct was to leave, to disappear, to retreat into invisibility. "Stay," he said. His voice was gentle. Not commanding. Different. She turned slowly, book still in her hands. "That night in the storm," he said, positioning his wheelchair by the window overlooking the garden where Emma played with her nanny, a child fully recovered now from the terror of her brother's betrayal. "You could have run. Could have pretended you saw nothing. Why did you help me?" Nora kept her eyes down. "You were hurt. Men have been hurt in front of you before," Giovanni said. "I've reviewed the mansion's records. You've worked events. You've seen blood before. You chose differently this time. Why?" The rain outside was gentler today, just a mist against the glass. Nora's voice came barely above a whisper, "Because when I looked at you, I didn't see a man who would hurt me. I saw someone who was bleeding and alone. And I know what that feels like." Giovanni studied her for a long moment. She could feel his eyes on her like heat. "How long have you been alone?" he asked. 8 years, she said. "Since I was 23. He didn't push further. He simply nodded, and she heard in that small gesture something like understanding. "You're safe here. Whatever came before, it doesn't follow you through these doors. Do you understand?" Nora finally looked up, meeting his eyes directly. She saw something there that made her breath catch, not pity, but recognition. A man who understood what it meant to survive when survival felt impossible. Yes, she whispered. I understand. 3 weeks later, everything changed. Nora had her day off and ventured into the city for the first time since arriving at the mansion. The Queen and Market was crowded with Tuesday shoppers, the produce section bright with summer colors. She was selecting apples when she saw him. Douglas Hale stood by the citrus display, older now, graying at the temples, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than everything she owned. Their eyes met across the produce section. His face split into a smile that turned her blood to ice. He walked toward her slowly, moving through the crowd like he owned it. Up close, she could smell his cologne, expensive and suffocating. Nora Reynolds, he said. His voice was smooth, conversational, the voice of a man greeting an old friend. I thought you were dead. Been 8 years since you disappeared. You look different. Cleaned up nice. Working somewhere respectable now. Nora couldn't move. Her fingers had gone numb on the apple she was holding. Hale stepped closer. You know, I still have those photographs. From the compound. Every moment we captured. Would be a shame if your new employer saw what kind of woman he's keeping under his roof. Unless we can come to an arrangement. He slid a business card into her frozen hand. His fingers brushed her palm, and she felt contaminated by the touch. $22,000, he continued. That's what you cost me when you ran. Equipment, time, missed revenue. You have 7 days to deliver it, all those photographs go everywhere. Your boss. Your church. Every person in your new little life. You understand me. She understood. She understood that he had found her. That the safety she had begun to feel was an illusion. That running only delayed the inevitable. Hale walked away. Nora stood in the produce section, shaking, the business card burning in her palm like it was hot enough to scar. The Queen and Market was crowded with Tuesday shoppers, the produce section bright with summer colors. She was selecting apples when she saw him. Douglas Hale stood by the citrus display, older now, graying at the temples, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than everything she owned. Their eyes met across the produce section. His face split into a smile that turned her blood to ice. He walked toward her slowly, moving through the crowd like he owned it. Up close, she could smell his cologne, expensive and suffocating. Nora Reynolds, he said. His voice was smooth, conversational, the voice of a man greeting an old friend. I thought you were dead. Been 8 years since you disappeared. You look different. Cleaned up nice. Working somewhere respectable now. Nora couldn't move. Her fingers had gone numb on the apple she was holding. Hale stepped closer. You know, I still have those photographs. From the compound. Every moment we captured. Would be a shame if your new employer saw what kind of woman he's keeping under his roof. Unless we can come to an arrangement. He slid a business card into her frozen hand. His fingers brushed her palm, and she felt contaminated by the touch. $22,000, he continued. That's what you cost me when you ran. Equipment, time, missed revenue. You have 7 days to deliver it, all those photographs go everywhere. Your boss. Your church. Every person in your new little life. You understand me. She understood. The safety she had begun to feel was an illusion. Hale walked away. Nora stood in the produce section, shaking, the business card burning in her palm like it was hot enough to scar. 5 days later, at 11 in the evening, Nora stood alone at Queen and Pier. Rain fell steady and cold, another storm rolling in like a punishment she deserved. The water below was black and churning. City lights reflected off the surface like broken promises. She had the $78 in her pocket. All of it. Every dollar she had rebuilt in 3 years of invisible work. It was not enough. It would never be enough. The pier stretched empty before her. No one knew she was here. Giovanni had not asked where she was going. She could not tell him. Could not watch him learn that she was never safe, that the past had claws longer than the future. Nora's hands shook so hard she could barely feel them. She thought of the 8 years in the compound. The chains. The photographs. The way Douglas Hale's voice sounded like violence disguised as gentleness. I survived 8 years of hell. I built something here. A small life, a safe life. And it's all gone because of one man who won't let me be free. Her hand moved to the railing. The water looked almost peaceful. Step over. Let the cold take her. No more running. No more fear. No more being hunted. But then her fingers touched something in her pocket, the worn prayer card she had carried for 8 years. The edges were soft from being held so many times. She pulled it out, rain spotting the faded image. And she remembered Giovanni's words, spoken in the mansion library 3 weeks ago. You're not nobody. Not to me. Not anymore. She stepped back from the railing. Her voice came out broken but determined. No. I've survived worse than you, Douglas Hale. I'll survive this too. Headlights flashed from the parking lot. Douglas Hale emerged with 2 men, walking toward her with predatory confidence. His footsteps echoed on the wet pier. Did you bring my money, Nora? He called out. She turned to face him, rain streaming down her face. No. Hale laughed. The sound carried across the water like something sharp and broken. Then I hope you said goodbye to your nice new life. 12 men in black tactical gear materialized from the shadows like ghosts. They moved in perfect silence. Behind cars, from the boat docks, from the warehouse entrance Hale didn't know existed. Red laser sights found his chest and the chests of his men. Giovanni's voice cut through the rain, amplified through a speaker. Douglas Hale. You're surrounded. On your knees. Now. Hale's face went white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating in air. His men froze when they saw the red dots dancing across their bodies. Giovanni wheeled forward from the parking lot, flanked by Vinny and Franco. Behind him, FBI agents in windbreakers emerged from unmarked vehicles. Special Agent Sarah Chen stepped forward with handcuffs, her face absolutely still. Douglas Hale, you're under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, extortion, and 43 counts of conspiracy, she said. You have the right to remain silent. Hale dropped to his knees in the rain, trembling like a cornered animal. You can't do this. I have connections. I have protection. Giovanni wheeled closer until he was looking down at Hale. His eyes were like chips of dark glass. You had protection. Past tense. Diana Whitfield was arrested 2 hours ago. Your entire network is in federal custody. Your accounts are frozen. Your properties are seized. You have nothing. Please. Hale's voice broke into something less than human. Please, I can give you names, locations, I can help. Giovanni's voice was ice. Death would be too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. You're going to spend the next 40 years in a federal prison. And every single day, you'll remember the woman you couldn't break. FBI agents lifted Hale from the ground. His legs could not support him. They loaded him into a black SUV as news cameras flashed from approved positions. His screaming continued all the way to the vehicle, muffled by the rain and distance. Giovanni turned to Nora. She stood frozen in the rain, shaking. He wheeled to her. His voice was gentle now, the voice of a different man. It's over. You're safe. Nora's legs gave out. Not fainting. Just surrendering. 3 years of carrying weight she could not share finally collapsed all at once. Giovanni caught her hand before she hit the ground, holding tight. Earlier that evening, at Diana Whitfield's penthouse, FBI agents knocked at the door at 7 o'clock. Diana answered in a silk robe, champagne glass in hand, her face perfectly composed. She was still beautiful in the way wealth made beautiful, untouched, unreasonable, permanent-looking. Agent Chen held up a warrant. Diana Whitfield, we have evidence of your involvement in a human trafficking operation spanning 6 states. Wire transfers. Recorded conversations. Testimony from 37 witnesses. Diana's composure shattered. Her champagne glass fell, shattering on marble floor. Those women are lying. I run charities. I help people. You recruited vulnerable women for Douglas Hale's operation under the guise of job placement, Agent Chen said. You laundered money through your foundations. You threatened witnesses who considered coming forward. You are under arrest. Diana was led out in handcuffs. Photographers captured every moment. Her wealthy neighbors watched from doorways, recognizing that they were witnessing a fall from grace that was absolutely final. The next morning brought news broadcasts showing Douglas Hale led out at dawn in an orange jumpsuit, facing cameras, his empire destroyed. 40-year federal sentence announced. No possibility of parole. Diana Whitfield's charities dissolved, her assets seized, her society friends releasing statements condemning her. The systematic destruction was complete for both. Total annihilation. Not quick. Not clean. Just thorough. Giovanni wheeled into the mansion's library that night. Nora sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the news coverage. Her face was pale and still. The prayer card lay on the table beside her, placed carefully like an artifact of survival. They can never hurt you again, Giovanni said. Nora's voice was small. Why did you do all this for me? Giovanni moved closer. The sound of his wheelchair on the library floor was like a ticking clock keeping time. Because 8 months ago, I was left alone at the altar of St. Catherine's Cathedral. The woman I trusted, the family I built, all of it was a setup orchestrated by Hale's network to humiliate me while they trafficked women from the cathedral staff. I was paralyzed, powerless, abandoned in front of 300 people. And nobody stepped forward to help. But you stepped between armed men and a child you didn't know. You stopped my bleeding without asking permission. You've shown more courage than anyone I've ever known. Nora met his eyes. Something shifted between them, unspoken but profound. A recognition that went deeper than safety. Deeper than gratitude. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. 6 months had passed since the federal agents led Douglas Hale away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling like ash. The Seattle rain fell gentle now, not violent. Nora Reynolds stood in the library of the Bianchi mansion, watching morning frost collect on the windows. She was no longer the woman who counted pennies. She wore a simple gray sweater, her hair falling past her shoulders, and when she moved through the hallways, she no longer shrank into the walls. Giovanni wheeled into the library at 7 in the morning, the same time he arrived every day. They had developed a rhythm over these months, a quiet companionship that asked nothing but presence. The prayer card she carried for 8 years now sat framed on his desk, a permanent reminder of the night the storm changed everything. Dr. Martinez asked me something yesterday, Nora said, settling into the chair across from him. The trauma therapist had become a fixed point in Nora's week, twice every Tuesday and Thursday. She asked if I felt guilty for surviving when others didn't. Giovanni poured coffee from the silver pot that cost more than the entire apartment Nora had once shared with 3 other women. What did you answer? I told her the truth. That I used to. But then I realized survival wasn't something I did wrong. It was something I did brave. Nora's voice was steady, clearer than it had been months ago when words came out fractured, like broken glass. And staying invisible would be insulting to the ones who couldn't escape. Giovanni watched her with an expression that had become familiar over the past half-year. Something between pride and something deeper, something he hadn't named yet. You start your college courses next week. January 5th. Social work degree. Nora had mentioned it once, almost as an afterthought, that she'd never finished her undergraduate education. She'd left at 19 to care for her mother, and then everything else had happened, the trafficking, the escape with $78 in her pocket, 8 years of invisibility. Giovanni had simply arranged it. The laptop arrived on her bed with a note in his careful handwriting, "Your mind deserves freedom too." She still had that note in a drawer. The rain intensified against the windows. Thunder rolled somewhere distant over Elliott Bay. Nora's body tensed. Thunderstorms still triggered panic, would likely do so for years. Giovanni didn't comment on the tightness around her eyes. He simply moved his wheelchair closer, close enough that she could reach for his hand if she needed to. She did. "When did you know?" Nora asked. "That you were going to survive what happened to you?" Giovanni's jaw tightened. The accident 3 years ago that had crushed his spine and killed his best friend Marco, not Marco the lieutenant, but a different Marco, someone he'd loved like a brother since childhood. That wound still opened sometimes. "I didn't," he said. "I thought survival was just what happened to you. Not a choice. Not something you could refuse." He paused. The sound of his breathing, steady and measured, filled the space between thunder crashes. "Then you bled on my shoulder in a thunderstorm, and I realized survival could be chosen. Could be built. Could be shared." The day Diana Whitfield's mansion was seized by federal authorities, news helicopters circled the Seattle waterfront capturing footage of movers carrying out art collections worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Her charities dissolved within 48 hours. Former board members issued statements distancing themselves from her crimes. 57 women who had passed through Douglas Hale's network came forward once they saw Diana arrested, once they understood that speaking would not result in retaliation. Nora had been offered a formal position the day after Diana's arrest. Not as a maid. As household administrator. $78,000 annually. The exact amount she'd arrived with, multiplied by 1,000. When she opened the offer letter, she laughed and cried simultaneously. Giovanni, watching from his study door, simply nodded. He had known. He always seemed to know what she needed before she could articulate it. The months moved forward like seasons turning. Fall became winter. The mansion decorated for Christmas with decorations Nora chose herself, not replacements for what Diana had selected years before. Giovanni gave her a gift wrapped in paper the color of winter snow, the deed to a small house in Ballard, fully paid, no mortgage, no obligation. "Just in case you ever want space that's only yours," the card read in his handwriting. She had cried for an hour afterward, the kind of tears that came from having been believed in, consistently, without condition. Emma turned 8 years old in November. The party was held in the mansion's garden, now frozen into crystalline beauty. Emma showed Nora her new books and climbed into her lap, a gesture so ordinary and so extraordinary that Nora's hands trembled. Nobody had depended on her like this. Nobody had chosen to be near her without transaction, without fear. At New Year's Eve, Nora wore a blue dress she had selected herself, simple and elegant. She stood by the library window watching fireworks explode across the Seattle skyline. Giovanni wheeled up beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "This year was different," he said. The fireworks reflected in his dark eyes. "Better. Because of you." "Because of us," Nora corrected quietly. "Both of us choosing different." Their hands lay inches apart on the windowsill. Neither moved to close the distance, but neither pulled away. The promise hung between them, patient and certain as the turning of seasons, as the clearing of sky after rain. By February, Nora had completed her first semester with perfect grades. Giovanni had framed her transcript and hung it in his office beside the security camera footage from that first night, her hands on his bleeding shoulder, both of them visible to each other for the first time, as if the camera had captured the exact moment she became real in the world. She moved into the house in Ballard on a Sunday, carrying boxes she had packed herself. The rooms were empty and waiting. She placed her few possessions carefully, deliberately, building a life that belonged entirely to her. And standing in the middle of the empty living room, she realized something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer invisible. Not because someone powerful had decided to see her, but because she had decided to be seen. She had walked out of hell and stood in her own light. Late February arrived like a promise kept. Giovanni asked her to meet him in the library at 8 o'clock. Spring rain fell against the windows, gentle, life-giving rain, not the violent storm that had changed everything. Nora walked through the mansion, and each step felt like choosing. Not because she was afraid to choose wrong, but because every choice belonged to her now. The Seattle skyline glittered beyond the library windows as she entered. Giovanni sat by the glass, his wheelchair facing the city lights. He didn't turn immediately when she came in. When he finally did, his expression contained something she'd never seen before, vulnerability mixed with absolute certainty, fear intertwined with hope. "A year ago, you were invisible," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "I passed you in hallways for 3 years and never saw you." "And you were just a voice giving orders," Nora replied, stepping closer. "Someone powerful I had to avoid." "What changed?" "The storm. You were bleeding, and I stopped seeing your power. I just saw someone who needed help." She moved to stand beside him, and his hand reached out, fingers finding hers with the certainty of someone touching something real for the first time. "Everything changed because we chose to see each other." Giovanni's eyes held hers. "I was left at the altar 8 months before that storm. The woman I planned to marry, the future I'd built, all of it was a lie. I thought I'd never trust anyone again." His voice dropped lower. "But you never asked me for anything except safety. Never wanted my power or my money. Just the chance to breathe." Nora knelt so they were eye level. "You gave me my life back." "No," Giovanni said, his hand steady in hers. "You took it back. I just made sure nobody could steal it again." He paused, and the rain intensified outside, the sound filling the silence between them. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. Not as your employer. Not as your protector. Just as a man who sees exactly who you are." Nora's eyes filled with tears that came from healing, not breaking. "Giovanni, I've been ready for months. I was just waiting to be sure I wanted this for the right reasons. Not because I'm grateful or scared or dependent. But because you're the first person who ever looked at me and saw someone worth believing in." Their foreheads touched. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was something deeper, something that had been building through 6 months of coffee at dawn, through her studying while he worked, through his hand holding hers during thunderstorms until the fear passed. "After the rain," Giovanni whispered, "the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places." "Yeah," Nora breathed. "Sometimes they do." How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.